Hi everyone, welcome to your second lecture. And in this chapter, we're going to take a more in-depth look at group leadership. So the first thing I want you to do is self-reflect. Come up with the top 5 qualities that make for an effective group leader. And it really doesn't matter if you haven't been in a group counseling setting before. You know, who was the best teacher that you had? Who was the worst teacher that you had? What kinds of ways did they interact with students and faculty and just, within the community that made them a good leader? Usually, what we value in someone else is reflective of who we are, right? And so these areas or these qualities, the more you can self-reflect and identify your strengths, the more you can spend some time developing them. In group counseling, the most important instrument that you have is you. And so this means, really being aware of your behavior, modeling, describing, whatever you would consider an assumption, I want you to start to verbalize. If you have an intuitive response to an interaction in the group, now you're going to start to verbalize it. So, I often tell clients that I work with in therapy, I want to hear what's your inside voice is, the voice that you don't share with anyone else. And in group counseling, we're often using that voice as a way to facilitate the group, bringing voice to what no one else will speak. And you want to encourage group members to try things out, take risks. It's an incredible act of courage to participate in a group experience. And what we know is, pretty much what you would guess about what makes an effective group leader. Somebody who is aware of their presence, and so that means really developing your empathy and compassion skills. I highly recommend keeping a regular self-compassion practice. This will help to develop your presence. Again, courage. I think group experience is all about having courage, and courage is really about being vulnerable and authentic and really putting yourself out there, knowing that you could get hurt. Challenging yourself. It's a lot of hard work. And really having a belief in the group and the group process. And I cannot overemphasize the commitment to self-care. Please, please, please be working on this now while you're in school still. And so what are typical issues that come up for beginning group leaders? Well, of course, anxiety, right? I mean, in the beginning, we're just worried about ourselves rather than necessarily what's going on in the group experience, which is totally natural, developmentally normal. Again, I think it took me about 3 years until I let go of, some of my unrealistic anxiety as the authors listed here. And self-disclosure is actually a really important feature of group. And it's not about, for example, let's say I'm in a substance abuse group, and because this is where I know self-disclosure is often really appreciated, someone talks about, grieving the loss of their substance, and it might be effective in that place to talk a little bit about a loss that you might have had, and then bringing that back to the group. You might ask others to share what they have experienced when they have experienced a loss. And so the use of self-disclosure, it isn't about therapy for yourself as much as it's about using yourself to facilitate the group. What you're sharing should be in support of the group process. There are those active listening skills again. These are the ones that we'll be taking a look at a little bit more in depth within this course. And really, I would say everything under active listening on this slide here, active listening, you could say, is the main header, with everything under here as a subheader. Sometimes we need to restate what a client is saying in order to clarify. Those two things can sometimes be interchangeable. We sometimes need to summarize because a lot of information has been provided and we don't want to lose track of what we're processing. Practicing using good open-ended questions. In therapy, therapy is sort of like an onion in that the outside layer is all the content that the client has given us. The next layer under is the meaning or the feelings. And the center is the interpretation. And that's really what we want to focus on as clinicians. We have to empathetically confront at times. In motivational interviewing, this is where we talk about identifying a discrepancy. So, for example, you've told me that you would like to have more friends and engage in more social interaction, but I noticed that you're pretty hesitant to put yourself out there in different kinds of ways that we've explored. Can you tell me a little bit about that? That's one way of doing confrontation, and we'll look at different ways of confronting group members. Reflecting feelings, I see this as sort of the most basic skill that a counselor can have. We want to be able to reflect the core feeling that the client is giving us. We want to provide support, empathize, and the group can start to sometimes get stuck in a loop, so to speak, and so we have to facilitate actively to make sure we're making progress. And what type of skills do we need to have as group leaders? We need to be able to set goals and be really clear about what the purpose of the group is. I mean, that's really where a lot of counselors get messed up, in that they're not sure if the group should be active or process oriented, self-reflective or educational. And if the goals aren't clear, then it's not going to be clear how to for the client how to engage. So we have to be really clear about what our expectations are. We should be involved in continual evaluation. Giving and receiving feedback, I would say. Modeling, we'll talk about these different skills. Linking is when, for example, you might have, let's say you have a group of clients who are suffering from anxiety. One person has just shared how they feel very shameful, about their anxiety because it keeps them from, achieving their goal. Well, as a counselor, I'm thinking about what kind of themes are coming up in the group. So I'm wondering if, I'll ask the group, I'm wondering if someone else has felt similarly. Or I might say, if Sue and Bobby have said something similar, I'll link them. I'll say, Bobby and Sue, it sounds like you have a very similar experience here. Is that true for others? And so in this way, you're providing an opportunity for others in the group to participate. Sometimes we need to block because we have talkers or people who are, don't have real healthy boundaries. And we have to, really from the first day be thinking about what the group will be like and how we will terminate. And so typically in a group setting, we begin with what's called a check-in. And there's lots of different ways to do this. The simplest way to do this, particularly in a time-limited group, is just to ask people, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 today? I also like to add creativity and metaphor, so sometimes I will ask people to choose their favorite song or their favorite movie and tell us why that is a metaphor of how they're feeling for the day. Often clients like to, what I say is like drop bombs, like 5 minutes before the group is going to end, they tell you their deepest, darkest secret. So we just want to be aware of any unresolved issues from the prior group and not leave issues hanging, because we're always looking for patterns in our work. We're asking for clients to report on their progress, particularly if it's a goal-directed group. And when a group isn't real clear, it's also good to have an agenda, if it's not a process-oriented group. So if you're facilitating what's called an open group, meaning that at any time a new member could come in, as opposed to a closed group where I would have the same group of 10 people over, let's say, a 6-week period of time, you have to really be aware of how that's going to affect the group norm and making sure that you're addressing newcomers' anxieties and helping them get normed to that particular group experience. I think the thing that I find, that might be scary for new clinicians at times is the idea of closure. This is the point where we want to ask clients what they've gained from the group, what they, how they might get the most out of the group. I often will ask in supervision groups, I ask my supervisees to write to the next supervisee who's going to come into the group, how they can get the most out of the supervision group. This is one way that I facilitate closure. So you can see I'm actively reflecting about how I'm going to close a group. You're always asking and facilitating self-awareness, and that's really about the evaluation of their progress. And, see if you can summarize at the end to come out with a major issue or theme that has been raised. I think one of the hardest things to do, well, you could say for therapy, period, for counseling therapy, whichever word you choose, is to help the client integrate the learning into their daily life, right? And so, let's say it's a 1-hour group once a week. You want to be thinking mindfully about how the client can intentionally integrate what they've been learning into the group in their quote unquote, outside of the group life. And so for this reason, a lot of group facilitators will have homework assignments, which is also often used within CBT approaches. Again, can't overemphasize this as we're thinking about cultural diversity, power, privilege, and oppression. We need to constantly be reflecting on our beliefs and attitudes, knowledge, skills, and interventions, and of course that of our clients. It's a continual process to become aware of your own biases. I am I have my own self-reflection group. I have a practice of reading one article or website or related material on implicit bias and social advocacy within counseling per week. I'm always seeking any opportunity that I have. We have so many wonderful opportunities in the Philadelphia area to learn about different cultural experiences, and to know that no matter what, your group could never not be influenced by the larger structural issues around oppression, racism, discrimination, and stereotyping. All of this is going to influence your group process. We never want to stereotype, and at the end of the day, it's important, and this should really go without saying, that we seek to understand the intersectionality of our clients. Nobody fits in a box. And in terms of, whether you're going to lead short or long-term groups, again, coming back to this piece about self-reflection and you as the tool of your group, what is your personality style? Are you very extroverted? Are you introverted? Do you talk a lot? Do you not like to talk a lot? Do you like a lot of structure? Do you not like a lot of structure? Do you like to plan? Do you not like to plan? The author here has said that your theoretical stance should be closely related to you, your values, beliefs, and your personal characteristics, which I definitely agree with, and it takes time to develop that. I would also say that this is not just about you. It's just like everything else in therapy. It's interconnected with the population that you're serving. And I'll give you an example. I started out my clinical work in substance abuse counseling, and in this setting, it was uh, it was very much needed that groups be highly active, directive, and structured because the client's boundaries were so poor. And yet, when I became a college counselor, um, that much structure actually impeded the group process because people were higher functioning. They could respect, interpersonal boundaries. And so then it was more apt for me to use a process group. And then I used more process then I used more theoretical orientations that are more process oriented. And so just like everything in counseling, you want to become aware of as many theories as you can. There's a gajillion of them, if we're being honest. And so the point of this is just to start with one, and then as you're going through uh, your work with clients, continue to be a lifelong learner and learn about different theoretical orientations. I started out very strongly CBT because it gave me a lot of structure and step-by-step manualized practice to work with clients. But I found over time that relational cultural theory more naturally fit who I am as a person in terms of my personality. And ultimately, I use an integrative approach now where relational cultural theory is sort of the larger lens that I work through, but I use CBT, mindfulness, and developmental theory interventions within my counseling session to support the goals of a relational cultural theory approach. Please, please, please don't stop learning once you're out of school. I know you're going to need a break, and that makes sense, but we really need clinicians to continue to learn and not get too comfy into what they already know. As we are aware of the fact that so many marginalized clients choose not to come to counseling, it's important to recognize that some of our methodologies need to be left behind. And so this means that we have to be in a continual learning practice that includes research. Additionally, I'm just going to sort of give a heads up here to the ACA Code of Ethics, which I believe y'all just took recently. We have an ethical, we should, to support our ethical code, we are contributing back to our profession, and there just aren't enough case studies from practicing clinicians about what's going out there in the field. I'm a researcher along with being a clinician, and so the more that you can partner with researchers in the field, the more we can highlight the wonderful work that you're doing and what kind of advocacy our professional organizations need to engage in to better support the work and the population that you're working with. Uh, Evidence-based group practices are really big, mostly in settings that take insurance because insurance companies really like them. And I think these are wonderful interventions, such as dialectical behavioral therapy. I'm a big fan of that. DBT skills groups are big on many college campuses, and we know that they've been tested. However, they do have their drawbacks, and what happens in a laboratory setting can't always be reproduced, nor does it take into account different cultural biases. And so, I think as counselors, we have to use evidence-based practice. However, we should also be critical of them, I guess is where I want to end on that. And here you can see some critiques here that they're too mechanicalistic, if I can say that word, that they don't sort of highlight the complexity of human change, which I would say is pretty accurate, right? Most people, if you think about going on a diet, how many people fail diets? They go through this process a gajillion times, and group therapy is no different. There are stages of change that people go through. And so it's important that we have a group experience that can adapt to someone's, stage of change. And ultimately, what I want to say about providing any evidence-based practice is to make sure you're putting the relationship first, that you're informing your practice by collecting feedback regularly, and making sure that it adds value to the client's experience.